Hi, and welcome to Feedback, episode number 4. Today, we are joined by Ryan Dohoney, an associate professor of musicology at Northwestern University, and he will be talking with us and Alex Mincek, a composer and also a collaborator of ours since 2010. We are really excited you're both available today to talk with us. Thanks.
It's really great to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
agreed.
Yeah, it's great to have another occasion to talk to my dear colleague, Alex Mincek, who's also professor of composition, at Northwestern University with me. So what I'd like to do today is really kind of start off by getting a sense of Alex and his music, but then really get into sort of what it's been like for all of you to work with him for so long. You mentioned that you've been working with him since 2010. You have at least 3 pieces that have been kind of central to your work and that have been documented really beautifully on recording. So I'm hoping we can get into a little bit about sort of what it's like to be with Alex's music for a long period of time and how that's changed, and at least how maybe Alex, this isn't a question you have to answer right now, but hopefully we'll get at sort of what working with Yarn Wire has done for your music and sort of how you've thought about it. So let's maybe just start off by talking a little bit with you, Alex, about your background as a musician, sort of briefly, like how did you come to composition, and sort of what other musical parts of your life have informed it?
I'm still a performer, so I came to music through just playing the saxophone, and as an instrument that was kind of situated in a lot of popular music and various forms of idiomatic improvisation. I guess I kind of came to composition as an outgrowth of improvised music and transcription of improvised music, so that a lot of my earliest relationships were either just straight up improvising or listening and kind of learning to notate what I was hearing other people do. And that just, I guess I got more interested in the idea of just disseminating my own musical ideas beyond, what I was hearing internally. So, yeah.
Just to follow up, and sort of, I'm really interested by that idea of transcribing improvisation as a way to kind of think about composition or kind of come to composition. Are there ways in which that sort of impacted your musical ideas in particular ways? That there's a sort of ethos of improvisation you were trying to capture in written music?
I didn't think about it at the time. At the time, it really was more of, I think, just something that had been pitched to me as a tool for my own music making ability, like my own knowledge as a musician. Like, I should learn how to notate these things, which is, that's a whole can of worms we can talk about. Yeah. What I think it has done in my own musical background, though, is I think a lot about kind of transmodal, like, relationship to music, so transposition was a first step of that. There was something I was doing in real time with emulating a musician, and then there was this like visual version of that thing, and I think that has inspired me to just, that's become an obsession of mine, right? It's like, how do different things get transposed? What do they generate? What do they lose when they kind of shift from one mode of the senses to another? So I wasn't conscious of that for a long time, but in looking back, I think transcription had a lot to do with me, like really merging my visual experience of things with my oral.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting, and we have not actually talked about that before, so I'm glad to know that now. Can you, I mean, beyond those sorts of ideas, can you tell me in terms of sound or in terms of process, what are some of the main concerns you have as a composer?
I guess just standing from the furthest perspective, I'm interested in things that are both just immediate, like there's a kind of really compelling surface, but then a surface that you can really get underneath and find things continually almost, I'd like to think. So, but not, I'm not, so I kind of approach, I think, all music making with that goal in mind. I want something to just be immediately compelling and also rewarding to dwell in further. And then moving forward, I guess in the last 5 years or so, I've just been more and more interested in just what sounds do to us physically, emotionally, psychologically. So really elemental ideas about sound. So really getting, in a way, really back to super basic concepts of what is going on acoustically, experientially, so phenomenologically.
Yeah. That's great. So let's get a little bit more specific and sort of bring Yarn Wire into this too. You, again, started collaborating in 2010, I think on the Kate Soper episode last week. You talked a bit about, I guess I'm addressing Yarn Wire now. You talked a bit about the sort of first concert that Kate's music appeared on with the premiere of Wolf, and also other pieces by Eric Wubbles and Alex Mincek. And I think Sam Pluta as well was on that concert. So I guess Yarn Wire, or at least those members that were involved in that, putting on that concert, what drew you to Alex's music, and how did you know of him prior to commissioning him?
Yeah, I had first encountered Alex's music as an undergraduate student at Manhattan School of Music in the late 90s, and then kind of was somewhat playing with Wet Ink in its earliest days, and just really enjoyed hearing Alex's music at those concerts. I don't think I played any of his music in those early days of Wet Ink until I joined Z's, which was a band we were both playing in together for several years, and then just ended up playing more and more of his music. Pendulum 1, Pendulum 5, Nucleus, a saxophone, percussion duo, viola, probably a bunch of other pieces as well. But I think that was my first encounter with it. And then I remember kind of attending some concerts with Russell and just checking it out and being like, wow, this is music that I enjoy playing. And I think the rest of the Yarn Wire members were like, we could maybe enjoy kind of adapting our budding performance practice to Alex's language.
Ian, I remember you. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I remember.
No, go ahead.
Ian and I were roommates at one point in Bushwick, and I remember you had some CD of Alex's. It might have been like an orchestral thing. Do you remember what it was? And like you put it on. Yeah. You had this terrible stereo, and you're like, "Yeah, check this out." And we were just listening to that, and I think at that time we were just like, it would be cool to work with Alex. I didn't know Alex at that time, and I think you did, but like it went pretty far back,
Yeah. Alex, did you write an orchestral piece that was played in Ostrava, like Few from Many or something? Or
that's right. Actually, no, Few from Many was premiered in New York by Peter Kotick, who had played my first orchestral piece with the SEM Ensemble in 2001.
Okay.
I forget what that piece is called. Anyway, yeah.
But it goes back
Few
a
for
while.
Many is probably what you're talking about.
Yeah. It was good.
Yeah, that was 2000. That piece is from 2003.
Okay.
Wow.
So could you maybe elaborate a bit, Russell and Ian, about those early kind of listenings to Alex music and sort of what was appealing to you about it beyond the sort of, it could be fun to play, but sort of what are some of the appealing sonic qualities that stood out to you then?
For me,
I have
it was
a couple thoughts. Russell, I don't know if you want
I'll just jump in real quick. Like for me, you were real excited about it. I mean, it kind of comes to personal things all the time. And I remember you being super excited, and that was very infectious, Ian. And, you're like, yeah, if, when we choose pieces, if someone's like really excited about a composer, we're just like, yeah, let's go for it. And this was that case. But like, musically, it's not, Alex's music at that time wasn't like anything that I was familiar with. And that is always good, in my opinion, because like, it was challenging. I was like, what the, wait a minute, this doesn't fit into any kind of box or sphere. And I'm like, I don't know, no. And then it kind of grabs you. So I liked that it was unlike anything that I had heard, at least before.
Yeah, I would echo that and just say like, almost exactly what Alex was saying. I've always been kind of like immediately grabbed by just sounds and colors. And then every time I've played a piece, the process of practicing, rehearsing, performing it, you inevitably go deeper and deeper each rehearsal session, each practice session. And like Alex's music has this quality where you're continuously rewarded by the work you put into it. So things that you might not have even noticed in your first performance, your third performance, you're like, I now understand this relationship. So that's a really rewarding process.
Yeah, that's great. So let's get specific a little bit and start talking about Pendulum Trigger, or Pendulum 6 Trigger. It's the correct full title. And again, you talked last week about the constraints on that particular concert in its premiere back in 2010, which is that you really just wanted to use one piano and then try to keep the percussion to a minimum in some ways, although most people didn't keep the percussion to a minimum. But Alex, how did those constraints impact how you approached writing for the group? I mean, had you written for an ensemble like this before, or was this just a new thing?
It was pretty new for me, and I have to say the constraints, I don't know if they were yarn wire imposed. I know that the forehand piano was yarn wire imposed, but I think I might have asked them for a percussion layout, just because I find still percussion really daunting in its inexhaustible options. So I found writing for them made extremely more approachable by drastically limiting what my options were. I often get very lost if everything is on the table. So by them stripping things down to what we ended up with, I thought it was a great thing for me in the process of making the piece, because it just it simplified everything, which ultimately makes it richer, at least from my estimation, because then I'm not dealing with again the almost minutia of different instruments I could keep on researching. Instead, it's like, oh, this is the stuff. Now I can get in researching what I want to articulate with the stuff,
Yeah, and sort of what did you want to articulate with the stuff? Like, what about the Pendulum is part of a series, but is there like a common kind of concept or idea that's uniting those? And then how did that play into Trigger?
There is, I'll say before I address the Pendulum idea, though, there's just the idea of this piano, the two pianists and the two percussionists. And so I knew, and I think yarn wire gets this a lot, is that the pianists often end up, the piano can be a percussion instrument or something not quite a percussion instrument. And I think yarn wire has dealt a lot with the pianists becoming percussionists. And I definitely went that route, but wanted to play with the idea of what the kind of distribution of both the identity of the instruments and the labor being brought to bear on the instruments, how that fluctuates with the listener's relationship to both the identification of the instruments, the source, and the relationship to a kind of historical mannerisms of those identities. So that was something that I was not up about. So that's why at the beginning of that piece, for instance, you hear a very, in a way, flat sonic profile, right? It's all these scrapey, indistinguishable in some sense sound. It's in other words, very narrow margins of difference. And then as the piece goes on, the margins of difference grow to where the middle of the piece is a piano's a piano, a drum's a drum, that kind of thing. And then it swings to the other pendulum where they're back in their non-identifiable states, but they're all in unison. So then getting to your pendulum question, I was exploring, the pendulum thing was just a metaphor for me for a long time because it merges kind of movement and visualization in ways that just also ring true with how I think about the world in general. So I'm often trying to merge a dialectic way of thinking with a dialogic way of thinking that is ultimately dialogic rather than dialectic. And a pendulum for me is kind of doing that. It's always contrarian, but it's never settling depending on the forces surrounding it. It's never settling on a position.
Yes, it's very much like the composer. It's swinging.
Yeah,
the composer's temperament. So, yes. Actually, I want to get into what it's like to play this music, but I think since Alex kind of brought up the timbre, Rob, could we go ahead and play the first minute of Pendulum, and then we can come back and talk to the group about playing it? Maybe. So our audience at home can get a taste of what Pendulum Trigger is like. Ian, since you had played Alex's music before, were you able to sort of bring any advice to your collaborators in Yarn Wire when you were sort of faced with the score?
I think the one really important thing about Alex's music, and it's something that we certainly try to do in Yarn Wire anyway, but a lot of its success in performance relies on like a precise rendering of what's on the page. So I think it was just, detail, like this turns on this turns off this sound. Forte means, like double forte means like play as loud as you possibly can. Double piano means like actually whisper quiet. Those sort of things that we had like really drilled home in every Z's rehearsal in like the early 2000s.
Cool.
So,
a furrowed brow.
What did you say, Russell?
A furrowed brow.
A furrowed brow is required for playing Alex's music.
Yeah. Well,
and I look across at you, Ian, when you're like leading this thing. It's just like, all right, here we go.
I don't know how that became my default like concert face, but yeah.
We all have one.
I just go there.
We all have one. I mean, what's so appealing, and I want to talk about this more with images of duration, but I think apart from just the glorious sound world that Alex creates, I'm really interested in the sort of conceptual depth that he brings to it philosophically. And he mentioned this idea of kind of beginning in kind of in a mode of unison or a mode of kind of similarity between the piano and the percussion, and then gradually moving away from that and coming back to it. Like when you're working with it, I guess as a group, how do you, does Alex talk to you about those kind of conceptual ideas, or what kind of ideas came up for you as you yourselves were working it out? At least in terms of Pendulum, but we'll kind of dive into this with images in it a little bit.
Can I actually answer that?
No, you can't. You're not the performer.
No, but because you asked about if I talk with them about this, I thought it's worth mentioning briefly that often the way I just described the piece isn't even apparent to me until the piece is had a life for a while. And I think this can be discouraging, having talked to a lot of younger composers, when they hear composers or performers talk about a work so clear-eyed about what they think it's doing. It can be daunting because it's like, well, wait, I don't have that thought about what I'm doing. And what I want to confess here is when I handed them that piece, some of the ideas that I think are just, that shout at me now, were not even a whisper when I gave them the piece. So it took time of my own thinking about what it was. So that's why I wanted to chime in is you kind of put them on the spot. Like, did you identify the conceptual links between?
Well, no,
we tore it down.
They played the piece, so I would,
No, I know. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Proceed, cool. Yarn wire.
I will say, like, when we get a piece, like, usually it's always just like, how do we put it together? Concerts tomorrow. Who's cues? I mean, that wasn't like this with this piece, but it's like concerts coming up. How do we cue? How do we put it together? And for me, I don't know if this is the same for you guys, but like, I don't really get what the piece is yet until after the performance, because usually things are moving so fast. And then even after that, when I hear a recording, like images of duration, like when Ian and I mixed it, I was like, yes, okay, there it is, because we're so in our zone, and our I guess our mixing board in our head is really attenuated to our own sound, as opposed to like the rest of the ensemble until later.
Yeah, I would say also though that even with a piece like Images of Duration, which has that really specific link to an artistic idea, or it's like each movement of that piece is like a tableau, and it has its own sound world, its own, sort of, in some ways, pitch material, maybe if it's a shorter movement, or timbres that are unique, or gestures. And so, but still, it takes until maybe the third or fourth performance of a piece like that until you're like, oh, yes, now I see that the grid's in black and white, and, cobalt becomes... now I'm going to forget the titles, but you know what I mean.
Me too.
Yeah. That's really, I think that's really, certainly sort of, like, I certainly understand. Yeah, I don't want to sort of put you guys on the spot for, like, please share your deep philosophical insights, which, you may or may not, be thinking about the piece in those terms in certain ways. But maybe since we're alluding to it, we can maybe move on to thinking about the kind of next major kind of commission and work you did with Alex, which is this piece, Images of Duration, for in memorial at Ellsworth Kelly, right? Anyway, or not?
I think it's just in honor.
In homage.
Ellsworth Kelly.
Yeah, I've got it right here.
So not in memorial. Yeah.
I could just look down and remember the title. So Yarnwire, can you tell me about the commissioning of this work, and sort of what were the circumstances that made you want to work with Alex again, or what circumstances came up that allowed you to work with Alex again, and to make such a major commission from him? So anybody want to share?
Yeah, I think one thing that has happened, over the years since we have started commissioning all these works, is that there are pieces, both because of their artistic quality, the popularity with audiences, maybe the ease of setup in some cases. But I think with Alex's piece, he wrote a piece that we love to play, that's fun to play. It's really effective and popular when we present it to audiences, but it's only about 10 minutes long. And I think like many artists and musicians, the older we get, the more we're into this sort of longer form, looking at things in depth. And we started to say, after a while, wow, wouldn't it be cool to start working with composers we really love again, to see where they are now. And Alex, I think, was one of those composers that his name kept coming up when we would have discussions like that.
That's great. Yeah. And how did you, it is a commissioned piece, so who commissioned it, and what was that process like of getting the funding for it?
Maybe that's a question for Russell.
Or Ian. I
think
Ian. You might have filed this one.
Yeah, right.
Who's assigned?
The grant application it was Chamber Music America supported this piece, which was great that they did that, and thank you, Chamber Music America. And Miller Theater was the presenting organization for this as well. It was premiered on one of their composer portraits concerts. So it's a great stage to present like a big new work on, because they really give space and some production support to that. So yeah, and I think just exactly what Laura was saying, like Beethoven has more than one string quartet, so there can be more than one Alex Mincek 2 piano 2 percussion piece.
That was our conversation.
It was the exact conversation.
Exactly
yeah, verbatim.
Alex, you're like Beethoven.
Don't let it go to your head. So I want to come back to something that Laura said. It's this, working with composers and seeing where they're at later on. That's actually what is so fascinating about, for me, listening to both Pendulum 6 and then shifting gears to Images of Duration. I feel, at least personally, they seemed like very different Alex Minceks. So I'm wondering, Alex, if you agree with that statement, which you can take or leave, but how would you explain the change, maybe, or how were you thinking about the change between something like Pendulum in 2010 and then Images in 2016?
Well, I think it had to do a lot with the specific circumstance. And what I mean by that is, first, I had already written Yarn Wire a piece. Why give them the same thing again? It would seem like a completely wasted opportunity. And then second of all, I knew that for this very specific portrait concert, they would be playing Pendulum 6 on the same concert. So that would also be a complete waste of an opportunity to do something much different than the piece I already made them. So I saw it as a real invitation from them to let me not fit a mold of who Alex, like what it is to write an Alex Mincek piece. I felt very confident and trusted by them to make them something much different. And they definitely afforded me that opportunity. And I really am grateful for making that piece. That's just, this is Images of Duration is, for me, one of my own favorite pieces that I just have. And I don't think it could have come out of a generic circumstance. In other words, it wasn't me changing in terms of kind of like my philosophy about composition or the world around me, as much as it really was tied to the specific circumstance of not just Yarn Wire, but the portrait concert experience, which was much due to Yarn Wire's kind of efforts.
Yeah, and how much of the complete work was played on that one? Because I know you expanded it afterwards, right?
I think a little over half. I think they probably it was like a 25 to 30 minute version they did at Miller. And again, the filling it out later also just had to do with specific circumstances. In this case, of the tuning of the pianos, because there was another piece jointly commissioned by, well, I guess it was just commissioned by Miller Theater, but it was for Mivos and Yarn Wire, Torrent, that would have detuned pianos. It made sense to have a second half of detuned pianos because there would be two substantial pieces. But then what does Yarn Wire leave that concert with after the fact? They have now a piece that's nearly impossible to program on its own unless they have a second half of pieces that are also tuned the same way. So I thought it would be just the right thing to do to give them either a whole concert or have a couple of movements in the piece, which were strategically written to stand on their own. So there's one like 15-minute piece, Oxblood becomes Orchid. Like that for me it can be a standalone piece that I've told them if they ever want to do that, they don't need the detuned pianos. I prefer the detuned pianos, but yeah. So I just wanted the piece to work in a lot of different ways, and so making the full version of it was a way to, I didn't want to waste them as a getting all those instruments together and doing all the tuning. It seemed like ridiculous to not have it add up to something big.
Yeah. Oh, that's super interesting. So I want to talk to Ning a little bit. Was this your first time with Alex's music, or at least this concert at Miller? Was this your first time playing Pendulum and then when you came also to Images too?
I had played Pendulum so many times. That is not to say that, I am tired of playing that, because I would say that piece really sort of stood out for me as sort of a newest member of the group when I joined, because obviously Ian, Russell, and Laura had put in so much energy and time to rehearse that piece, and that piece was not easy to play, to put together, and to like specifically rehearse with me. And I was really struck by the kind of the big machine going at full speed and full energy for solid 10 minutes. I mean, the kind of just the concentration and everyone hunching over the instruments, getting together, that kind of sort of power that one feels in the chamber group was really special. And I would say that that first piece really was, a highlight for many years. And that piece was featured on so many of the concerts I, first played with Yarnwire in the last 9 years I've joined the group, but especially focus in those first 5 years. And I just have to say that piece particularly struck me because as a pianist, like Laura and I, always 9 feet away from anyone on stage, and that piece was felt so intimate because there was so much, Laura and I pretty much on top of each other. And then also, getting so many cues, your eyes have to, at certain points, my eyes don't leave Ian. So that was a really intimate and exactly
doing that
head cue.
It taught me a lot. But when it came to image of duration, was really different experience. I felt myself in many parts of the piece really just sitting back, enjoying that really complex sound world, really playing one note and for the next 2 measures and just really sipping myself through that sound world. So it's very different experience. I don't want to say that piece is any easier. It really, it just feels like you hold your breath for 45 minutes and you don't really let out. And so that type of intensity is still there, but there's so much of the intense air of sound just still in parts that really just what makes that piece very effective for me.
Maybe I think I want to come back and talk to the other members about performing Images, but maybe we can take a listen to one of the movements for a moment and then kind of come back and have a bit more in-depth discussion about some of the issues that Ning raised. Mm-hmm. So this is the first minute of the movement Vermilion Becomes Cobalt from Images of Duration. to hear a bit of, kind of apart from the later section of images. So, I mean, one of the things that Ning was bringing out really interestingly was this kind of contrast in texture and mood between the two pieces. I mean, for me as a listener, there's, especially with Alex's earlier music, there's all this kind of machinic quality, and having performed a little bit of his music too, I really do get exactly what Ning is talking about, this sort of intense kind of focus you have with other people, and the way that you feel very much part of some sort of like Voltron of like new music, that you have to sort of function that way. But I think what's so interesting to me about Durations is just that there's almost just this kind of glacial, static quality to so many of the parts that to me just seems so, I guess just seemed so different from my experience of Alex's music before. But I wanted to maybe get the rest of the group's take on this as a kind of wrapping up, sort of thinking about performance and thinking about ways in which this piece challenged you or your own experiences working on it.
It felt like monumental, from the get-go. Every movement, I mean, when you have a piece this big, you can feel what's ahead, but you have to focus on what's happening in the moment too. So it's for me, it's, when we step on stage to play this piece, you kind of have to take a breath and get ready for this journey, and that is very different than Pendulum, where I think we would huddle backstage and be like, all right, here we go, and then we go out and we're just like bam. But this piece, we huddle and it's more of a like a centering, and getting ready for this kind of journey. I don't know if that answers anything, but it's a very different kind of experience as a performer. I will say, like, in my part, there's a moment, I forget the movement name, but we're pretty much playing in unison, like these unison hits, and it's still, other than these hits, pretty much. And I don't think I feel as nervous in many pieces as in that moment, because around every sound is this stillness, and that stillness is really important to articulate, which is kind of interesting. And then we have to articulate these unisons too, and each hit is monumental. Each hit changes perception and time, and it's just like the thing I hear during those moments is my heart just pounding, just like I don't know why, but it's very, very it's a very heavy moment.
Yeah, I think the word expansive comes to mind, but I think that's what the audience or the listener experiences. For us, the word taut comes to mind. Yeah, it's there, that really different experience of what it feels like to play versus I think what it maybe feels like to listen. I don't know. That's sort of my feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't really have the ability to listen to the piece while I'm playing, so I don't really know exactly what is happening at all times. So when I finally heard Images of Duration on that beautiful recording, I was like, oh, this is how the piece sounds like.
Yeah. I mean, I really like describing it as taut. I mean, that's such an intense, I mean, the excerpt we played has this kind of like Messiaen vibe that I really dig. But no offense, Alex, if that is insulting. So,
which bird?
But even that sort of like no, yeah, was so exotic. No, now I lost my train of thought. Sorry.
Sorry.
But even the sort of tautness to it, but even the vermilion becomes cobalt. Even that has this kind of it has a quality of repetition, but it's not the same kind of quality of repetition that you've used earlier in earlier kinds of pieces, or what's happening in Pendulum. It's not that kind of a feeling, right? It feels a little bit more like the cycles are much more sort of disjointed than they kind of are in other pieces, like Trigger, for instance, like where everyone is kind of locked in. Like this feels much more like everyone is kind of on their own cycle, and kind of bringing that out in different ways throughout the piece. But that's just my musicological take on it. But anyway, so I think we're close to sort of running out of time. But are there sort of other final thoughts from the ensemble about this piece, or about other things that they wanted to bring up about Alex's music?
Well, actually, Alex, quick question for you. Like, around 2016, I do feel like there maybe was like some sort of shift in your compositional voice, and I don't know intimately every one of your pieces, but I think I've heard most of them, or many of them. And was there something like around the images of duration, compositional time, that like opened some new doors, or I don't know?
Yeah, I think the idea of realizing what some of my previous music was about under the surface helped me create a new surface. In other words, I was making a music based on its immediate impact, but I was using a lot of concepts that I hadn't fully internalized what they were about. And I feel like once I was able to figure out what I was doing, it allowed there to be a new surface, because now I knew what was at the top now, and that creates now a new underneath, which I'm wrestling with now maybe. But yeah, I think that did happen, and it was just, I think, reflecting a lot. I had a few pieces now that I liked and that had gotten good recordings, so it allowed me to really listen to them. In the same way you guys say you don't know what the piece sounds like until you listen to it, I have to say it's the same thing with me as a composer, to maybe a different degree, but I'm kind of figuring out what that was. What was behind that? There's what I think was behind it. There's the how it is. In other words, there's how I made it, but what is it? And I think with reflecting on earlier pieces, I come to grips a little bit more with the what. I still am never confident that I know what a piece is, but yeah, I think, and then it creates a kind of feedback loop, because now my new music, it can be in some kind of dialogue with, a better understanding of my older music. And I think about it in those kind of like slow evolutionary moves. Like I haven't sensed like the shift wasn't a reaction against anything, right, or for something. It was more like, even though it might manifest itself that way on the surface, that's not my thinking. My thinking was actually very slowly evolutionary, just again realizing some concepts, so that Images of Duration is much more of me thinking a lot more about acoustics and kind of audio, perceptions and illusions that can be brought about by various psychoacoustic events, and just the way that our hearing interacts with our listening, to get all Pauline Oliveros on us. So
cool.
So, I mean, could I maybe push you to be a little bit more specific on those points, and sort of what exact phenomena were you interested in? Kind of.
Well, this idea of there's this Marianne Amiche article, which I can't remember the title off the top of my head, but in the article she identifies like the room, the ear, and the brain is these three different aspects of listening. And that just really, it just hit me like a ton of bricks when I read that article, because that's what I was looking for, is that there's this idea of what's happening in the room, there's this idea of what we're consuming through our ears, and there's this idea of what our brain is doing with all of that. Yeah. And so Images of Duration was my own little sonic experiments about, here's what I think I'm putting into the room, here's what I think my ear is taking in, and let's see what my brain does with it, or what one's brain does with it. And so, I mean, I picked materials that I really did think had a specific kind of liminalness, or fragility that could push them in different directions of a moving experience, depending on how one reacted with the room and their ear and whatnot. So I know that's still all vague. I could get hyper specific, but then when we need another hour. But yeah, I mean, there's lots of kind of even super nerdy math stuff about even the moments you were talking about with cycles of time and things. And I really calculated the amount of resonance so that at different dynamics, you'd have a different duration of time before the next event, but the resonance would be at the exact same constant. So it would make you think about time differently. In other words, if your brain is measuring resonance, then you're going to have one relationship with time. If your brain is following dynamics, you're going to have another relationship with time. And so, all of that kind of stuff was just being more thought about and less intuitively generated than maybe in some previous pieces, where I think I was investigating those sorts of phenomena, but I was doing it, I was kind of doing it more ad hoc. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think the essay by Amache is Psychoacoustic Phenomena in Musical Composition. Is that the one you're thinking of?
I
anyway,
think yeah.
It's a great essay regardless.
Yeah.
So, all right, well, Alex, what's on the horizon for you? What's up next? Or what are you working on now?
I'm working on a piece for string quartet and electric guitar for Nadav Lev and Mivos Quartet.
Nice.
Nice.
Yeah.
Great. Anything else you want to plug while we're at it?
Yes, I do. Somebody I know wrote a really fascinating book recently on Oxford University Press called Saving Abstraction that people should check out. That is by Ryan Dohoney, a fascinating document about Morton Feldman, and goes much deeper than just Feldman's music, but the relationship to funding and all sorts of other issues. So I would invite people to check that out. Not trying to embarrass you, Ryan.
Thank you for the plug.
There'll be a link in the description.
Yeah.
Yes. Great. Thanks so much. All right. Well, throw it back to Yarn Wire.
Yeah. Well, guys, thanks so much for being here today and spending the time talking about this stuff. It's really nice to see you, and nice to see Ian and Ning and Laura. Our next episode is going to air on Tuesday, September 8th, with a talk with David Franzen and RJ Oscani. Remember to subscribe to the channel and check out Patreon. And guys, thanks so much for being here on Feedback.
Pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.